The text message arrived at 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night that would split my life into before and after. "Working late. Don't wait up," it read, signed with Laurel's usual passive-aggressive efficiency. I stared at my phone screen, sitting in my leather recliner with a half-empty beer growing warm in my hand, and felt that familiar knot of suspicion tighten in my gut. My name is Mitchell Avery, and at 48 years old, I thought I knew my wife. 23 years of marriage teaches you things. How she takes her coffee, which side of the bed she prefers, the way she hums off-key when she's genuinely happy. But lately, Laurel had become a stranger wearing my wife's face. The changes started small, the way cancer probably starts with a single rogue cell. New clothes that cost more than our monthly grocery budget, late nights at the medical billing firm where she worked as office manager, phone calls that stopped abruptly when I entered the room, and that phrase that had become her favorite weapon. "You wouldn't understand my world anymore, Mitchell." Maybe she was right. My world consisted of investigating insurance claims, determining whether that warehouse fire was accidental or fraudulent, whether Mrs. Patterson's slip and fall at the grocery store warranted a payout. I dealt in evidence, documentation, proof. Laurel's world had become shadows and locked doors. Yes, locked doors. 3 weeks ago, she'd installed a lockbolt on her home office, claiming she needed privacy for her work files. When I pointed out that medical billing didn't typically require CIA-level security, she'd given me that look, the one that suggested I was being unreasonable for expecting transparency in my own house. Our son Dylan, 20 years old and still living at home while attending community college, had supported her completely. "Dad, you're being paranoid," he'd said, not looking up from his phone. "Mom deserves her space." Space, privacy. These had become sacred words in the Avery household, used to justify everything from secretive phone calls to unexplained credit card charges. But I'm an insurance investigator, and suspicion is my profession. So I'd done what any rational husband would do. I'd installed a camera. Not in our home, mind you. I'm not a monster. But Laurel's office building had been experiencing break-ins, and when I offered to help the building owner upgrade their security system, he'd been grateful enough to give me written permission. The camera I'd installed in the shared office space was completely legal, documented, and justified. I just hadn't mentioned it to Laurel. Now, staring at her text message, I opened the security app on my phone. The office should be empty except for my wife, probably working late on some urgent billing issue that couldn't wait until morning. I expected to see her hunched over her computer, maybe talking on the phone with a client or colleague. The camera feed loaded slowly, pixelating before resolving into a clear image of Laurel's office. She was there, all right, sitting behind her desk. But she wasn't alone. My 20-year-old son, Dylan, was sitting in the chair across from her, leaning forward with an intimacy that made my stomach clench. They were talking in low voices, their heads close together, and there was something in their body language that screamed wrongness. I watched, frozen, as Dylan reached across the desk and touched my wife's hand. Not a casual, familial touch. Something else. Something that made me want to throw my phone across the room and pretend I'd never seen it. But I kept watching. Because that's what I do. I investigate. I document. I gather evidence. What I saw next nearly stopped my heart. Dylan stood up, walked around the desk, and sat on the edge of it, right next to Laurel. She didn't move away. Instead, she looked up at him with an expression I recognized, one I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Then Dylan's hand was on her shoulder, and she was leaning into him, and I was watching my son and my wife in a moment that no father, no husband should ever have to witness. I set my phone down with shaking hands and walked to the kitchen, where I promptly threw up in the sink. When the retching stopped, I splashed cold water on my face and tried to process what I'd just seen. My wife and my son. Not an affair in the traditional sense, something worse. Something that violated every boundary of family, trust, and basic human decency. I could have stormed over to her office, could have confronted them both, screamed, demanded explanations. Instead, I did what 25 years as an insurance investigator had trained me to do. I started building a case. First, I saved the video footage to 3 different secure locations. Then I accessed our joint financial accounts and started tracing unusual expenditures. What I found made the betrayal even worse. For the past 6 months, Laurel had been systematically draining our joint savings to pay Dylan's rent, tuition, and living expenses. Not just the agreed-upon parental support we'd discussed, but thousands of dollars in additional payments. She'd even opened a credit card in both our names and used it to furnish an apartment I'd never seen, an apartment that, according to the lease I found in her email, was being rented by Dylan under an assumed name. My son wasn't just violating boundaries with my wife, he was being paid for it with my money. I spent the rest of the night documenting everything, screenshots of bank transfers, copies of credit card statements, the security footage from multiple angles and timestamps. By dawn, I had enough evidence to destroy both of their lives. But I wasn't going to act in anger. I was going to act like the professional I'd trained to be for over 2 decades. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of investigating insurance fraud, I was investigating the fraud of my own life. While Laurel got ready for work, humming that off-key tune that used to make me smile, I sat in my car in the driveway and made phone calls. "Mitchell, what can I do for you?" Attorney James Marks had handled our wills and the house purchase. He was about to handle something much more complicated. "I need to discuss divorce proceedings, Jim. Emergency separation, asset protection, and some unusual circumstances." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "How unusual are we talking, Mitchell?" "The kind that require family court intervention and possibly restraining orders. Can you be in my office at 10? "I'll be there." My second call was to Dr. Sarah Kim, a therapist who specialized in family boundary violations. I'd found her through a professional directory, and her credentials were impeccable. More importantly, her bio mentioned experience with complex family dynamics and trust violations. "Dr. Kim, I need to schedule an emergency consultation regarding a family situation that involves inappropriate relationships and financial manipulation. I have an opening at 2 this afternoon. Can you give me a brief overview?" I found myself unable to say the words out loud. My wife and my adult son have been engaging in behavior that violates normal family boundaries, and there's evidence of financial misconduct. I need professional guidance on how to proceed legally and ethically. "I see. Yes, Mr. Avery, I think we should definitely talk." The third call was the hardest. Carter Williams had been my best friend since college, the best man at my wedding, Dylan's honorary uncle. He was also a retired police detective who understood evidence and procedure. "Carter, I need your help with something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." "Jesus, Mitch, you sound like hell. What's going on?" I told him everything: the security footage, the financial records, the months of suspicious behavior. When I finished, the silence was so complete I could hear his dog barking in the background. "Holy shit, Mitch! Are you absolutely certain about what you saw?" "I'm an insurance investigator, Carter. I don't make assumptions. I have video evidence, financial records, and documented patterns of deception. This isn't a misunderstanding. What do you need from me? Help me do this right. No mistakes, no emotional decisions. I want them to face consequences, but I want those consequences to be legal, documented, and permanent. Meet me for lunch after your lawyer appointment. We'll make a plan." By the time Laurel left for work, kissing me goodbye with lips that had probably been on our son's face the night before, I had 3 appointments scheduled and a growing sense of purpose. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder and more focused. I spent the morning going through our financial records with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant. What I found was worse than I'd initially thought. The secret apartment wasn't the only hidden expense. There were restaurant charges at expensive places Laurel claimed never to visit, hotel rooms booked during times when she was supposedly working late, clothing purchases that never appeared in her wardrobe at home, and payments to Dylan that went far beyond normal parental support. Regular transfers of $500 to $1,000, always with vague memo lines like miscellaneous expenses or emergency assistance. My son was being kept like a mistress. The attorney meeting was efficient and brutal. Jim Marks listened to my evidence presentation with the professional detachment of a man who'd seen every possible variation of human betrayal. "The financial misconduct alone gives us grounds for emergency asset protection," he said, reviewing the bank statements. "The other situation, that's more complex. No laws have been broken, technically, but it certainly constitutes a violation of the marriage contract and grounds for divorce based on inappropriate conduct." "What about Dylan? Can he be held financially responsible for the money she's given him?" "Potentially, yes. If we can prove he was aware the funds were being diverted without your consent, we might have grounds for a civil suit. But Mitchell..." Jim leaned forward, his expression serious. "Are you prepared for how ugly this is going to get? When you file these papers, when you present this evidence, there's no going back. Your marriage is over, and your relationship with your son is probably over too." I thought about the image burned into my memory: Dylan's hand on Laurel's shoulder, her face tilted up toward his with an expression of intimacy that belonged in our bedroom, not in a family relationship. "It's already over, Jim. I'm just making it official." The session with Dr. Kim was more difficult. She was a small woman with kind eyes and the sort of calm presence that probably helped her patients feel safe. But there was nothing safe about what I was telling her. "What you're describing is a form of emotional incest," she said after I'd finished my account. "It doesn't have to be physical to be deeply damaging to family structures and individual psychological health." "Is it common?" "More common than people think, unfortunately. Usually it involves a parent and child forming an inappropriate alliance against the other parent, often with financial or emotional manipulation involved. The fact that your wife has been financially supporting this relationship while hiding it from you suggests a level of premeditation that's quite concerning. What should I do? Protect yourself first. Establish clear boundaries. Document everything, which you're already doing. And understand that both your wife and your son are likely to react very badly when confronted with consequences. People who engage in this type of behavior often feel entitled to it, and they tend to lash out when that entitlement is challenged. By the time I met Carter for lunch, I had a clear picture of the legal and psychological landscape I was navigating. What I needed now was tactical advice. "You're going to serve her at work," Carter said over his burger. It wasn't a question. "That's what Jim recommended. Maximum impact, minimal opportunity for her to hide assets or coordinate a response with Dylan. And you're going to record everything from here on out." "Already started." I showed him the small digital recorder I'd bought that morning. "Every conversation, every phone call, every interaction. If this goes to court, I want a complete record." "What about Dylan?" That was the question I'd been dreading. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, cheered for at Little League games, had become a stranger who was willing to betray me in the most fundamental way possible. "I don't know yet. But he's an adult, Carter. He made adult choices. He gets to face adult consequences. Just be careful, Mitch. People do crazy things when their world falls apart. And you're about to drop a nuclear bomb on both of their worlds." That afternoon, I filed for emergency separation and asset protection. The papers would be served the next day at Laurel's workplace, in front of her colleagues and supervisors. There would be no private conversation, no opportunity for her to spin the narrative or play the victim. I also changed the locks on our house and opened a new bank account in my name only. By the time Laurel came home that evening, humming her off-key tune and asking about my day as if she hadn't spent the previous night in an inappropriate embrace with our son, the trap was already set. "How was work, honey?" she asked, the endearment sounding like mockery now. "Productive," I said. "Very productive." The process server arrived at Laurel's office at 10:15 a.m. on Thursday morning. I know the exact time because I was parked across the street, watching through binoculars like some sort of private investigator from a bad movie. But I needed to see her reaction. I needed to witness the moment when her carefully constructed deception came crashing down. Through the large windows of the medical billing office, I could see Laurel at her desk, probably reviewing insurance claims or arguing with healthcare providers about payment schedules. She looked professional, competent, trustworthy, everything an office manager should be, everything a wife should be. The process server was a middle-aged woman named Janet who looked like someone's aunt, unthreatening, official, and carrying a manila envelope that contained enough legal documentation to end a marriage and destroy a family. I watched Janet approach the reception desk, show her credentials, and ask for Laurel Avery. The receptionist pointed toward Laurel's office. Janet walked over, knocked on the door frame, and waited for acknowledgement. Even from across the street, I could see the exact moment Laurel realized what was happening. Her face went white, then red, then white again. She stood up so quickly her chair rolled backward into the wall. Janet handed her the envelope, said something brief and official, and left. Laurel stood frozen for maybe 30 seconds, holding the envelope like it might explode. Then she tore it open and started reading. I watched her face cycle through disbelief, horror, and rage in rapid succession. She grabbed her phone and started dialing. My phone rang 15 seconds later. "Mitchell, what the hell is this?" Her voice was shaking with fury and panic. "Legal documents, Laurel. I thought that would be obvious." "You can't do this. You can't just... These accusations are insane." "Are they? Because I have quite a bit of evidence that suggests otherwise." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. When she spoke again, her voice was different, calculating instead of panicked. "We need to talk. Come home. We can work this out." "I don't think we can, Laurel. But you're welcome to try explaining your relationship with Dylan to the family court judge." "My relationship with Dylan? He's our son, Mitchell. What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Facts that are documented, recorded, and about to become part of the public record." I could hear her breathing heavily through the phone. Around her, I could see her coworkers pretending not to stare while obviously listening to every word. "I'm coming home," she said finally. The locks have been changed, your belongings are packed and in the garage. The code is your mother's birthday. You bastard. You absolute bastard. Call Dylan, Laurel. Tell him his rent payments are about to stop. I hung up and drove home, arriving 20 minutes before Laurel's Honda pulled into the driveway with the aggressive speed of someone barely maintaining control. She tried her key first, jabbing it at the lock like she could force it to work through sheer will. When that failed, she pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Mitchell, open this door right now." I opened it, but I left the security chain engaged so she could only see a slice of my face. The garage code is 0847, your mother's birthday. Your stuff is in clearly marked boxes. I'm not going anywhere until we talk about this insanity. Then you'll be trespassing, and I'll call the police. Your choice. She stared at me through the gap in the door, and for a moment I saw something that might have been genuine fear in her eyes. 23 years, Mitchell. 23 years of marriage, and you're going to throw it away based on... what? Paranoid fantasies? Video evidence, financial records, 6 months of documented deception and misappropriation of marital funds. Would you like me to email you copies, or would you prefer I just present them in court? The fear in her eyes was replaced by something colder. You don't know what you're doing. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. Explain why our son has been visiting your office after hours. Explain why you've been paying his rent with money from our joint account without discussing it with me. Explain the hotel charges and restaurant bills and all the other expenses that don't match your claimed whereabouts. Dylan needed help. He was struggling, and I was trying to support him. Support him how, Laurel? The question hung in the air between us like a blade. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. I want to see the video, she said finally. You'll see it in court, along with everyone else. Mitchell, please, don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, work things out. Dylan and I... It's not what you think. What is it then? Another long pause. He was having problems, depression, anxiety about school. I was trying to help him through a difficult time. By meeting him alone in your office after hours? By giving him thousands of dollars without telling me? By lying about where you were and what you were doing? I was protecting him, and protecting you from worrying. Protecting me, or protecting yourself? She didn't answer that. Instead, she stepped back from the door and pulled out her phone. Dylan, it's Mom. You need to come home right now. We have a problem. I closed the door and watched through the security peephole as she paced in the driveway, talking rapidly into her phone. 20 minutes later, Dylan's beat-up Toyota pulled up behind her car. My son got out looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He was tall like me, but lean where I'd grown thick around the middle. His hair was longer than I liked, and he had the kind of carefully cultivated stubble that took more effort than a clean shave. He looked like a young man trying very hard to appear older and more sophisticated than he was. Laurel met him halfway up the driveway, and they had a quick, intense conversation I couldn't hear. Then they both approached the front door. Dad? Dylan's voice was uncertain, maybe even scared. Can we talk? We can talk through lawyers, Dylan. You're an adult. You made adult choices. Now you get to face adult consequences. I don't understand what you think happened. I opened the door fully this time, looking at both of them standing on my porch like unwelcome solicitors. I think you've been having an inappropriate relationship with my wife. I think you've been taking money that doesn't belong to you. And I think you've both been lying to me about it for months. Dylan's face flushed red. It's not like that, Dad. Mom was just helping me through some stuff. What kind of stuff requires secret meetings and financial arrangements your father can't know about? Personal stuff. Private stuff. Nothing in this family is private from me, Dylan. I'm your father and her husband. Or I was, until you both decided I wasn't worth the truth. Laurel stepped forward, putting herself slightly in front of Dylan in a protective gesture that made my stomach turn. Mitchell, you're being unreasonable. Dylan is our son. Whatever help I gave him, whatever support he needed, it's normal for a mother to... To what? To meet him alone after hours? To give him money secretly? To lie about where she is and what she's doing? To protect her child when he's struggling? From what? From me? I'm his father, Laurel. If Dylan was having problems, why wouldn't you tell me? Why wouldn't we handle it together, as parents? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked at Dylan, then back at me, and I could see her trying to construct an answer that made sense. You wouldn't have understood, she said finally. Try me. But she couldn't, because there was no explanation that didn't sound exactly like what it was, a betrayal of the most fundamental kind. Get your things from the garage, I said. Both of you, and don't come back. I closed the door and turned the lock bolt, listening to their muffled voices on the other side. They argued for another 10 minutes before I heard car doors slam and engines start. When I was sure they were gone, I called Carter. "It's done," I said. "Phase 1 is complete." "How did they take it?" "About as well as expected. Denial, anger, attempts at manipulation, standard operating procedure for people who've been caught. What's next? Now we wait for them to make their next move. And when they do, we'll be ready." They made their next move sooner than I expected. At 2:30 a.m., my security system alerted me to motion in the backyard. I checked the cameras and saw Dylan trying to climb over the fence, apparently planning to break into his own childhood home. I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Mitchell Avery at 1247 Maple Street. There's someone trying to break into my house. I have video evidence." "Are you in immediate danger, sir?" "I don't think so, but the individual is on my property illegally, and I have a restraining order that prohibits contact." That wasn't technically true yet. The restraining order was still being processed, but it would be true within 24 hours. The police arrived within minutes, their flashlights illuminating Dylan as he stood in my backyard looking like a deer caught in headlights. I watched from my bedroom window as they questioned him, checked his ID, and eventually escorted him to their patrol car. Officer Martinez came to my front door to get my statement. "The young man says he's your son, and he was just trying to retrieve some personal belongings." "He's my son, yes. But he doesn't live here anymore, he doesn't have permission to be on my property, and if he wanted personal belongings, he could have asked during daylight hours like a normal person." "Any idea why he'd be climbing fences at 2:30 in the morning?" I showed Officer Martinez the security footage from earlier in the day, Laurel and Dylan on my porch, the heated conversation, their obvious anger when I refused to let them in. "There's a domestic situation in progress," I explained. "Divorce proceedings, asset disputes, that sort of thing. I think he was trying to find financial documents or evidence that might help their case." "We're not going to arrest him this time, Mr. Avery, but we're going to strongly advise him to stay away from your property. If it happens again, call us immediately." After the police left, I couldn't get back to sleep. Instead, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and thought about the boy who used to live in this house, the kid who built blanket forts and asked me to check for monsters under his bed, the teenager who came to me for advice about girls and jobs and college applications. When had that boy become someone who would climb fences in the middle of the night to break into my house? My phone rang at 6:15 a.m. Laurel. "How could you call the police on your own son?" "Good morning to you too, Laurel, and I called the police on a trespasser. The fact that the trespasser happens to be my son doesn't give him special privileges to break into my house." "He wasn't breaking in, he was trying to get some of his things." "At 2:30 in the morning? By climbing over the fence? There are easier ways to retrieve belongings, Laurel, like asking." "You wouldn't have let him in?" "You're right, I wouldn't have, because he's chosen sides in this divorce, and he's not on mine. He's your son, Mitchell. No matter what you think happened, no matter how angry you are at me, he's still your son." "Is he? Because sons don't usually conspire with their mothers to deceive and financially defraud their fathers." "It wasn't fraud. It was family support. Secret family support. Hidden family support. The kind of family support that comes with lies and cover stories and clandestine meetings." She was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want, Mitchell? What will it take for you to stop this insanity?" "I want the truth, all of it. I want every dollar you've given Dylan accounted for and explained. I want to know exactly what kind of support you've been providing, and I want both of you to face the consequences of your choices." "And if we do that, if we explain everything, will you consider reconciliation?" The question caught me off guard. For just a moment, I wondered if there might be some explanation that made sense, some version of events that didn't involve the betrayal I'd witnessed. Then I remembered the security footage, Dylan's hand on her shoulder, the intimate way she'd looked up at him, the months of lies and deception. No, Laurel. Even if you could explain it all away, even if there was some innocent explanation for everything I've seen and documented, the trust is gone. You chose to lie to me. You chose to hide things from me. You chose to make financial decisions without consulting me. That's not a marriage. That's not a partnership. That's not something I'm interested in salvaging. 23 years, Mitchell. 23 years that apparently meant less to you than whatever you've been doing with Dylan. It's not what you think. Then what is it? But she hung up without answering, leaving me alone in my kitchen with cold coffee and the growing certainty that I was doing the right thing. The next few days fell into a routine. I went to work, investigating other people's deceptions and fraudulent claims with a new appreciation for the complexity of human betrayal. I came home to an empty house that felt both peaceful and lonely, and I documented every attempt Laurel and Dylan made to contact me, every voicemail, every text message, every drive-by of my house. Because they were watching me too. I'd see Dylan's car parked at the end of my street when I left for work in the morning, Laurel's Honda in the grocery store parking lot when I stopped for supplies. They were trying to figure out my routine, my vulnerabilities, my next move. But I'd been an investigator for 25 years. I knew how to spot surveillance, and I knew how to use it to my advantage. On Friday afternoon, I got a call from Jim Marks. "Mitchell, we need to talk. Laurel's attorney has filed a counter-petition." "What kind of counter-petition?" "They're claiming you've been financially abusive, controlling, and paranoid. They're asking for spousal support, half the house value, and they want the court to order you into anger management counseling." I laughed, actually laughed out loud. "Financial abuse? I'm the one who discovered she'd been secretly draining our accounts." "They're claiming you controlled all the finances and never gave her access to discretionary funds for family emergencies." "What family emergencies?" "According to their filing, Dylan has been struggling with depression and anxiety. Laurel was providing financial and emotional support during a mental health crisis, and she kept it private to protect both Dylan's dignity and your peace of mind." "And the after-hours meetings?" "Family counseling sessions. Apparently Laurel has some training in crisis intervention, and she was providing informal therapy." I had to admire the creativity of their story. It was almost believable if you didn't have video evidence of their body language and financial records showing the scope of the deception. "Jim, I need you to file a motion for discovery. I want access to Dylan's medical records, his school records, and any documentation of this supposed mental health crisis. Though if they're going to claim this was all therapeutic, they need to prove it." "That's going to be invasive, Mitchell, and expensive. I don't care. If they want to lie in court, I want them to have to lie under oath with documentation." That evening, I was reviewing financial statements when my doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I could see a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, carrying a briefcase. "Mr. Avery, my name is Rebecca Stone. I'm a private investigator working for your wife's attorney. I'd like to ask you a few questions." I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "What kind of questions?" "Questions about your marriage, your relationship with your son, your recent behavior patterns." "Are you recording this conversation?" "No, sir." "Well, I am." I showed her the digital recorder I now carried everywhere. "And I'm going to advise you that anything you want to know about my marriage, my son, or my behavior is going to come out in court anyway. So you can ask your questions there, under oath, where the answers will be part of the public record." She smiled like she'd expected that response. "Mr. Avery, your wife and son are very concerned about your mental state. They think you might benefit from professional help." "My mental state is fine. It's my family situation that's problematic." Sometimes when people are under stress, they can misinterpret innocent situations. They can see threats or betrayals where none exist. "Are you a licensed therapist, Miss Stone?" "No, sir." "Then I don't think you're qualified to assess my mental state or my interpretation of situations." "What if I told you there might be explanations for the things you think you've seen? Explanations that don't involve the kind of betrayal you're alleging?" "I'd say that explanations are what courtrooms are for. And I'd say that if those explanations exist, your clients should have offered them 6 months ago instead of lying to me." She handed me a business card. "If you change your mind, if you decide you want to hear their side of the story, call me." After she left, I called Carter. "They're trying to flip the script," I told him. "Make me the crazy, controlling husband who's imagining things." Standard defense strategy: attack the credibility of the accuser. The problem is, I have evidence. Video, financial records, documented patterns of deception. Then let them attack. Evidence doesn't lie, even when people do. But as I hung up the phone, I realized that the battle was just beginning. Laurel and Dylan weren't going to accept defeat quietly. They were going to fight, and they were going to try to destroy my credibility in the process. The question was, how far were they willing to go? I got my answer the following Tuesday night. I was working late in my home office, reviewing case files and trying to distract myself from the ongoing legal battle, when my security system started chiming. Multiple motion sensors, multiple cameras, all activated simultaneously. I pulled up the feeds and felt my pressure spike. Laurel and Dylan were in my backyard, but they weren't alone. Dylan's friend Mace was with them, along with 2 other young men I didn't recognize. All 5 of them were moving toward my back door with the purposeful coordination of people executing a plan. I called 911 first, then Carter. "They're here," I said when he answered. "All of them," and they brought backup. "How many?" 5 total. Laurel, Dylan, and 3 others. I'm 10 minutes away. Don't do anything stupid. But as I watched them try to force my back door, I realized I might not have 10 minutes. The door was solid, but 5 determined people could probably break it down. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd started keeping by my desk and positioned myself in the hallway where I could see both the front and back entrances. Then I turned on every light in the house and activated the external security lights, flooding the yard with illumination. "I know you're out there," I shouted loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "The police are on their way." The pounding on the back door stopped, but I could hear voices. Angry, urgent whispers. Through the security camera, I watched them huddle together, apparently debating their next move. Dylan broke away from the group and walked to where he knew the camera could see him clearly. "Dad, we just want to talk. Open the door." "Talk to my lawyer, Dylan." "This is insane. We're family." "Family doesn't break into each other's houses." Laurel appeared next to him, her face pale in the security lights. "Mitchell, please. We need to resolve this. We need to work things out." "The time for working things out was 6 months ago when you started lying to me." "I never lied to you. Every day you didn't tell me about Dylan was a lie. Every dollar you gave him without telling me was theft. Every time you said you were working late when you were really meeting him was fraud." One of the young men I didn't recognize stepped forward. He was bigger than Dylan, with the kind of build that suggested he spent a lot of time in the gym. "Maybe you should listen to your family, old man. Maybe you should get off my property before you get arrested for trespassing." He laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "What are you going to do? Hide in there all night?" "I'm going to wait for the police to arrive and arrest all of you for breaking and entering, trespassing, and intimidation." But even as I said it, I realized they might not wait for the police. The big kid was looking at my back door like he was calculating how much force it would take to break it down. That's when I made a decision that probably saved my life. I opened the front door, stepped onto my porch with the baseball bat visible in my hands, and started talking loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my wife Laurel and my son Dylan. They're here tonight with some friends to break into my house. Laurel has been having an inappropriate relationship with Dylan and stealing money from our joint accounts to pay for it. Dylan has been taking that money and pretending to be a victim, and now they've brought some muscle to intimidate me into dropping my divorce case." Lights started coming on in neighboring houses. I could see people looking out their windows, and at least one person was obviously recording with their phone. "Mitchell, stop it," Laurel hissed, but she was smart enough to keep her voice down. "Why? Are you embarrassed? Are you ashamed of your relationship with Dylan? Because you should be." "There is no relationship. You're making this up." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and opened the security app. "Would you like me to show the neighbors the video of you and Dylan in your office? Because I have it right here." The color drained from her face. "You wouldn't. Try me." Dylan stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "Dad, you need to stop this right now." "Or what? You'll beat up your father? In front of all these witnesses? Go ahead, Dylan. Show the neighbors what kind of son you really are." "I'm not going to hit you." "No? What about your friends? Are they going to hit me? Is that the plan?" The big kid was looking around nervously, apparently realizing that breaking down doors and intimidating people worked better without an audience. "This is bullshit," he muttered. "I'm out of here." He walked away, followed quickly by the other 2 young men Dylan had brought. Within seconds, it was just the 3 of us, the nuclear family that had exploded into radioactive fragments. "There," I said. "Now it's just us. So talk. Tell me what you came here to say." Laurel looked around at the neighbors watching from their windows, then back at me. "Not here. Not like this." "Why not? Are you ashamed of something? Because if you're not doing anything wrong, if this is all innocent family support like you claim, then you should be happy to explain it publicly." "Mitchell, please." "Please what? Please pretend I didn't see what I saw? Please ignore the financial records? Please forget about the lies and the deception and the betrayal?" Dylan stepped closer, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You're destroying our family." "I'm not destroying anything, Dylan. I'm revealing what you and your mother already destroyed." "It's not what you think." "Then what is it? Explain it to me. Explain it to the neighbors. Explain it to the police when they get here." And as if summoned by my words, I heard sirens in the distance. "Last chance," I said. "Tell me the truth, or tell it to a judge." Laurel and Dylan looked at each other, and in that look I saw everything I needed to know. Guilt, fear, and a shared secret they weren't willing to reveal. "We're leaving," Laurel said finally. "Good. Don't come back." They walked away as the police cars turned onto my street. and I realized that this was probably the last time I'd ever speak to either of them as family. The police took statements, reviewed my security footage, and filed a report. Officer Martinez, the same cop who'd responded to Dylan's fence-climbing incident, shook his head as he watched the video. "Mr. Avery, I'm going to strongly recommend that you get a formal restraining order. Tonight could have gone very badly." "I know. I'm filing the paperwork tomorrow." After everyone left, I sat on my porch in the quiet darkness and thought about the family I'd lost. Not the family that had been destroyed tonight, but the family I'd thought I had. The wife who loved me, the son who respected me, the life we'd built together over 23 years. That family had been an illusion, a lie I'd been telling myself while the people I trusted most were betraying me in ways I'd never imagined possible. But I was done with illusions now. I was done with lies and half-truths and benefit of the doubt. Tomorrow, I would finish what they had started. I would present every piece of evidence, every financial record, every moment of video footage to the court. I would make sure that their betrayal became part of the public record, documented and permanent, and then I would move on with my life, free from the people who had proven they were willing to destroy me to protect their secrets. The truth had set me free. Now it was going to set them free too. Free from my money, my house, my life, and my trust. They had chosen their path. Now they would walk it alone. 6 months later, I sat in Judge Patricia Hoffman's courtroom and listened to her read the final divorce decree. The evidence had been overwhelming. Video footage, financial records, documented patterns of deception, and testimony from multiple witnesses. Laurel's story about providing therapeutic support for Dylan's mental health crisis had crumbled under cross-examination when her attorney couldn't produce any medical records, therapy notes, or professional credentials to support her claims. "Mr. Avery," Judge Hoffman said, looking over her reading glasses, "the court finds that Mrs. Avery engaged in systematic financial misconduct, violating the trust and fiduciary responsibilities inherent in marriage. The court further finds that her conduct, while not criminal, represents a fundamental breach of the marriage contract." I kept my expression neutral, but inside I felt something that might have been satisfaction. "Mrs. Avery will receive no spousal support. Mr. Avery will retain full ownership of the marital home and primary custody of all joint assets. Mrs. Avery will be responsible for reimbursing the marital estate for all unauthorized expenditures, totaling $47,312. Across the courtroom, Laurel sat with her attorney, staring at the table. She'd aged in the past 6 months, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen her. Dylan wasn't there. He'd moved out of state after dropping out of college, apparently unable to face the consequences of his choices. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court is issuing a permanent restraining order prohibiting Mrs. Avery and Dylan Avery from contacting Mr. Avery or approaching his residence. And just like that, it was over. 23 years of marriage dissolved into legal documents and court orders. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness, exactly, but the calm that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, even when it was the hardest thing. Carter was waiting for me on the courthouse steps. "How do you feel?" "Free," I said, and realized I meant it. "Any regrets?" I thought about that question as we walked to our cars. Did I regret losing my family? Did I regret the end of my marriage? Did I regret the public humiliation and legal battles? "No," I said finally. They made their choices. I just made sure they faced the consequences. What's next? I'm thinking about early retirement. Maybe travel, maybe consulting work, maybe just enjoying the fact that nobody's lying to me anymore. Sounds like a plan. That evening, I sat in my living room now, legally and permanently, and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. I wasn't celebrating the end of my marriage, but I was acknowledging the end of my deception. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I hope you're happy now. You destroyed everything." I deleted it without responding. Laurel could send all the messages she wanted from borrowed phones and fake accounts. I was done engaging with her reality distortion field. Instead, I called my brother in Colorado, whom I hadn't spoken to in months because I'd been too embarrassed to admit what was happening in my marriage. "Mike, it's Mitchell. I wanted to let you know, the divorce is final." "Jesus, Mitch, I'm sorry. Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay. I'm free." And for the first time in months, that wasn't just something I was telling myself. It was the truth. Outside, it was starting to rain, but inside my house, everything was warm and quiet and honest. I had lost a wife and a son, but I had gained something more valuable, the knowledge that I would never again accept betrayal disguised as love, lies disguised as protection, or manipulation disguised as family support. I had learned to value truth over comfort, evidence over emotion, and self-respect over the illusion of family harmony. It had cost me everything I thought I wanted, but it had given me back everything I actually needed.